Gabe, thank you so much for joining us on WCIA TV's CI Living to discuss your new film, Red Penguins. I really appreciate you joining us.
Thanks a lot, Pam. It's good to be here.
I'm glad that you're able to. After creating your other hockey movie, Red Army, had you heard of this story about the Pittsburgh Penguins joining forces with the Russian Red Army hockey team? Had you heard of that before?
No, I'd never heard about it, and I was promoting Red Army at some of the major film festivals, and in New York, after one of the screenings of Red Army, this guy came up to me as sort of a strange guy, and he was very passionate and basically wanted me to, was pitching me this story about this same Red Army team and what happened in the 90s after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I just kind of shoot him off because I really wasn't interested in looking at Russian hockey again. And he sent me a lot of materials, uh, a huge box of material on this whole story that he'd been collecting for many years, 20 years. And I kind of eventually ended up looking at it and was amazed at this story, amazed at at what had happened, the fact that even this story was even possible, that this famous Red Army team, the glory of the Soviet Union, the greatest sports dynasty in history, basically went bankrupt when the Soviet Union collapsed and went to their enemies, the United States, to save them, the Pittsburgh Penguins. And it's just this incredibly unlikely story that was so dramatic and strange, and what had happened, the characters in the story that I knew was something really special and sort of darkly humorous, but also kind of telling about what was going on in Russia in the 90s and how it led to what we see today.
It is a crazy, bizarre story, and I think it really proves that truth truly is stranger than fiction. Tell me, when you were talking with Steve, and who's the documentary's subject, one of them, and then going through all of these boxes of stuff that came to your doorstep, and doing your own research too, and you've got a vast knowledge base about hockey and about the Russian team. What was the most surprising thing to you that you found in doing all of this research or discovering it? What was the most surprising aspect?
Well, I think kind of the fact that at the time in the 90s there was a lot of optimism between America and Russia, the fact that we could maybe work together, that the old communist system collapsed and now they're kind of going to turn into capitalists, we thought, and there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of companies going in there and investing. And what I kind of learned was that it wasn't just the Russian Penguins that met kind of a very aggressive, dangerous outcome, but it was most companies that went over there saw the exact same thing, that when things kind of got successful and people were making money, that the criminal element, inevitably came in and tried to get a piece or basically ruin any venture that was possible there.
Right. And your access, not just to those characters, if you will, and they truly are characters out of a storybook, but also for the film footage and archival footage of the training from the kids in Russia back in the day. How did you have access in finding all of these newsreels and footage and found footage, as well as having access to people like Pushin, would have scared the living daylights out of me?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think what makes any period documentary really dynamic is your ability to find great archival material, getting people, Americans in particular, into a world that they've had no idea existed. That because and finding footage that's very dynamic and taking people into a new world, and so I had a very good producer in Russia. That basically there are people that collect a lot of odd stuff you find.
Mhm.
um, they're collectors, they're hoarders, and we found kind of a guy that was basically shooting handheld video at the time on this team. He was just some odd guy, that Russian guy that lived in Texas, for instance. And Steve had a lot of material in his attic, the main character, that Steve is kind of also a little bit of a hoarder. Thank God he collected all this stuff, because it really made the film, you know, unique in that, anytime you go into a strange world that you've never seen before, you've never even heard of, it's always going to be kind of interesting for the viewer, rather than just seeing talking heads.
All right, and it is interesting. I mean, your story arc is absolutely incredible. You're on the edge of your seat as you're watching all of this unfold. There's one scene though that I would really like for my viewers to know about, and that's the scene where you, and I believe you're with your family in Russia, and you have this sense that you're being watched. Can you take us into that scene a little bit?
Yeah, well, that actually, I mean, sort of my family in Russia at that time for those 10 days, it was my crew, and I
Okay.
only had basically three people there. And essentially, what was happening was we interviewed a KGB prosecutor. This guy basically worked for the KGB and dealt with all their criminal activity. And so it was towards the end of the shoot, and I was feeling a little bit strange there in Russia at the time. The sanctions were at a very high point, and there's a lot of negativity towards America and politics and stuff. So, anyways, it was one of the last days of the shoot, and this KGB prosecutor basically just started talking about all this very openly about kind of the place Russia is in right now, and it was a little bit negative towards Russia. And so I was kind of surprised. He kept going, going, going. I almost couldn't interrupt him. He was talking so much. Then an overweight man showed up right behind us and was just basically listening for 10 minutes about, I don't know, 3 or 4 feet behind everybody. And finally, I just like kind of looked back, and I asked the producer, I said, what the hell's going on? Why is this guy standing right behind us? And
Right.
so as soon as I turned back, basically 5 cops came out of nowhere and said, there's a bomb in the area and you guys got to get out of here. So the crew started running, and it was just very odd. And that was the end of that kind of interview. The producer said, do you think you've got what you need? I said, yes.
Absolutely, and that's all you're going to get, right?
Yeah.
Um, you know, uh, I saw this in Toronto last year. It was one of the part of the festival, and timing wise, at the festival was amazing. But now with its release and the election coming up, tell me what your thoughts are about this film being released at this time.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I like to make films that are, timeless, but I think obviously this film shows how, first of all, I think that it's impossible to really be diplomatic and communicate with other countries without really knowing the history, the culture, the mentality, the psychology. I think we in America, we really know only kind of the headlines and the hacking, and we don't really understand the culture, and I think we fear what we don't know. And my films, both Red Army and I think Red Penguins, allow people to go inside the culture and understand it a little bit better, the mentality, the psychology. So that's a really important thing in diplomacy and kind of communication. So I think the film Red Penguins also shows how Russia got to where it is today, and the fact that it was dealing with so much suffering and chaos in the 90s, that it's it's not surprising that they wanted a very strong leader that just calls the shots, and keeps things somewhat safe, at least safer than creates order. They kind of went in the fully opposite direction again with a sort of a more dictatorship, but it helps people understand all of that stuff.
Right. And one of the things that I love about all of your movies, including this one, is the fact that, believe it or not, this is a lot of fun. This is a funny, humorous take on what's happening, even though it's very poignant and relevant. Gabe, thank you so much. Can you please tell our audience how people can watch this movie beginning, I believe, on Friday, August?
Actually, today.
Oh, today.
Yeah,
Okay.
so the film is now available on iTunes, Amazon, Google Play, and every rental and sale platform, as well as every on-demand cable platform.
Very good. Gabe Polsky, thank you for joining us on CI Living. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.